Hello my dear friends and welcome to my channel. My name is Barbara and today we're going to be looking at Virgo through the houses. So this is basically going to tell us what area of life you're most critical of yourself in. Now Virgo does mean several other things. For the sake of this video, we're going to be focusing on just that. If you have Virgo in more than one house, you can check out both of those houses. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, we have Virgo in the first house. So when you have Virgo in the first house, the area of life you're going to be most critical in is of the self, okay? You're going to be very, very critical of yourself as a person, your identity. You might go through a lot of changes. Also, you could be critical of your appearance, okay? There could be an energy of that going on. Overall, Virgo does strive for perfection, so you might find yourself constantly changing the way that you look, okay? Your appearance, these types of things. Also, it can be with your personality as well. It doesn't necessarily just have to be physical. It can be in terms of your personality. So you could be going through changes within your personality, wondering maybe, okay, I have to fix this within myself or this within myself. You're constantly striving for that perfection, but it's within the self because it is the first house. When you have Virgo in the second house, in this area of life, it's going to be all about your finances, okay? It could also be your career. Most of the time, finances are connected to career. So you could be highly, highly critical of this area for yourself. So it can be kind of like you're constantly striving for perfection in terms of some sort of financial goal, okay? You constantly have this like saving number in mind, and then when you reach that number, you want it even better and better and better. That tends to be the shadow of Virgo, okay? So Virgo always wants to be better, and it's kind of like whenever they do get to that goal that they have in mind, then they want even more, okay? They want to always be better. They're always striving for perfection, that's the thing. The thing to understand is there is no perfection in life, okay? So it's kind of like, you might notice yourself within your career, within your jobs, you're constantly striving for better, but it's kind of like you're always going to be striving for this, okay? So that's a huge thing that Virgo teaches us. This is what tends to happen when you have Virgo in the second house. It does deal with your finances, it does deal with your career. So you might notice yourself constantly nitpicking this particular area. When you have Virgo in the third house, this deals with communication, written or spoken word. It can also deal with your siblings. So the area that you might be most critical in within your life could be the area of speech, could be the area of communication. Maybe you're someone who's very good at grammar, okay? Maybe you're correcting other people's grammar all the time, or maybe even your own, or maybe you're constantly thinking of how to say something before you actually say it, okay? Because Virgo does deal with the mind. It is ruled by Mercury as well as Gemini, okay? So it's kind of like you might constantly be in this energy of like overthinking, should I say that, should I not say that? How should I say it? Should I say it like this? This is going to sound better. This is the whole thing here. Also in terms of your siblings, so there could be some sort of criticism maybe coming from your siblings or for you within your sibling relationships, okay? You're always striving for this perfection. That's the thing with Virgo, especially when it's in the shadow. It always wants to be perfect, okay? It always wants to be on top. It always wants to be in that energy of like, they're trying to constantly get to that perfection state. What Virgo does teach us, and life in general, is that this perfection energy does not exist. So for you guys, you might, again, notice yourselves constantly about speech, about writing, the written or spoken word. Maybe you might even work in something like marketing, and you're constantly seeking for that perfection in that particular area. But this is really the area that you in particular are seeking perfection in. It's going to be the third house, so written, spoken word, and siblings. It could even deal with short distance travel, even technology. If you have Virgo in the fourth house, the area that you might be seeking that perfection in, and you might be overly critical of, is your home, okay? It could be your home life. It could even be when you're growing up, you kind of have this like idea of like, this is what a perfect home looks like, and my home doesn't look like that. My family's not like that. I want to have the perfect family, and it's going to later on translate into your own home. Okay, when you're in your own home, you might be overly critical of the types of dynamics maybe within the home, or if you live on your own, maybe it could just be like the way that you are about yourself, okay? Because if you have Virgo in the fourth house, you probably have it on your IC. So it's kind of like when you're in private, you could be super, super critical of yourself, right? You might not show this to other people, but you might be going into that hyper analytical mind, because that is what Virgo tends to deal with. So it's like you go into this hyper analytical mind where you're kind of like, again, just critical of yourself as a person, maybe even your own emotional world. Also, it can even be in the physical sense. So it's like you're hypercritical of the way your home looks. Everything has to be in a particular place. Everything has to be neat. Everything has to be tidy. You don't want people moving things around. These types of things, okay? Something to keep in mind when you have Virgo in the fourth house, it's all things with home, all things with family. It can even be real estate, and it can also be how you are in your own home. If you have Virgo in the fifth house, this area deals with your creativity, your inner child, and your children. So this can go in a range, okay? So maybe you're someone who is very creative and you have a lot of creative projects. The area that you're hypercritical of are your projects, okay? You might be super critical of them, especially in terms of like something that you've created that you don't even put it out there, okay? You don't even put it out there because you're like, it's not perfect yet. That's the thing that Virgo is teaching us. It really is teaching us that that perfection level actually does not exist, that we're seeking, and that there's always going to be something better. That's why you'll notice a lot of the time people who have a lot of Virgo energy overall in their natal chart, they're constantly jumping from thing to thing. So for you guys with that 5th house in there, it does deal with your creativity aspect. It could also deal with your leadership aspect. Maybe you have a business. It can also deal with your inner child, and it can deal with your own children, okay? So if you have your own children, you could be very critical of your children, or even when you were younger, maybe your parents were hypercritical of you, because it does deal with that inner child, right? So there's an energy going on there where the inner child maybe did not feel good enough. That is why Virgo is seeking for perfection, because there is that energy always, I'm not good enough, or this isn't enough. There's an energy of like, this is not enough, something's not enough. That's really what's going on with Virgo. And the 5th house is going to be your creative matters. It's going to be your inner child. It might be your children in your life if you do have children. Virgo in the 6th house, this is the area of health, healing, and being of service. So the area that you might be super critical in could be the area of health, okay? You could be very, very critical of your own health, okay? You'd be constantly changing maybe the way that you look, maybe going on a new diet, maybe constantly going to the gym. You could be very critical of your diet, okay, or maybe other people's diets. So it's kind of like when Virgo finds something they like to eat, they eat just that thing. Or if they find a diet that works for them, they constantly do that diet. So it's really, really important to watch out for this if you do have Virgo in the 6th house. Also, you could be hypercritical of your own health, okay? So you could even fall into the shadow trait of hypochondria, where it's kind of like, oh my gosh, is this thing wrong with me? Is this thing wrong with me? Is this thing wrong with me? When really there's nothing wrong with you. That's the whole thing to understand with Virgo. It's like Virgo's always seeking for perfection. Perfection does not exist, okay, in this world. So that's the whole thing to understand. That's really what Virgo is teaching us. It is teaching us that in seeking for that perfection, it actually does not exist anywhere in this world. So for those of you who do have Virgo in the 6th house, it does deal with your health, okay, health in general. It does deal with healing. You could become hyper obsessed with healing or your own healing journey. It could also be a being of service. So it could even be like you're super, super critical of, you know, the way that maybe someone is of service to you, let's say customer service, or even for yourself. Maybe if you're helping people, you still might feel this energy of like, I'm not helping them enough. I need to help them more. I need to put more of myself into this, okay? Something to keep in mind if you do have Virgo in the 6th house. Virgo in the 7th house, this is the area of your relationships. So the area that you're super critical in and constantly seeking for that perfection that technically does not exist is going to be in your relationships. So you might notice that when you get into a partnership with someone, it's kind of like they don't live up to an expectation that you have of them. You guys might also notice that it's like maybe that person is hypercritical of you. With the Virgo energy, what you guys can always do is you can always spin it in the positive direction, where it's like you guys are both striving for perfection together. So a lot of the time for people who have Virgo in the 7th house, you'll notice like if they're in the more positive attributes of Virgo, they're going to be interested in things like training together, right? Going to the gym together, self-improvement together, doing courses together, these types of things. That's a way to twist that energy in a positive light. Otherwise, it's really going to go in the shadow trait, where you're going to basically have partners that don't live up to your expectations. You're going to constantly be disappointed by your partners or your relationships. It can also be your friendships as well. Keep in mind, 7th house does deal with all interpersonal relationships, because of the fact that you're constantly seeking that perfection that technically doesn't exist, okay? That's what Virgo is teaching us, okay? Energetically, it's like Virgo seeks that perfection. It seeks something to be better, right? But it's like at the end of the day, no one's perfect. No relationship's ideal, no dynamic is ideal. So it's kind of like when you do have it in the 7th house, you basically have to learn to not overly focus on the flaws, maybe in another person, maybe in the dynamic, maybe not focus on other relationships where you're like, they look perfect, but we're not, these types of things. So that's what tends to happen when you have Virgo in the 7th house. Virgo in the 8th house. So this is an interesting area because 8th house deals with a lot of different things. Okay, it is the energy of Scorpio. So it does deal with sex, death, rebirth, joint finances, joint energies overall. Okay, it could be a merging of energies. It also does deal with the occult. It can deal with astrology, and it can deal with transformation as well. So when you have Virgo in the 8th house, you yourself might go through a lot of transformations, and it's like, when you go through these transformations, you might feel like it's not enough, okay? That's the whole thing with Virgo. Virgo, most of the time when it falls into the shadow, it becomes hypercritical, okay? In terms of your sexuality, you could become super critical, right? Or even your sexual performance, okay? Something of the sort where it's like, you're just like constantly like focusing on this area, because Virgo becomes hypercritical of whatever area it's in, because it does deal with the merging of energy and the merging of assets and finances. Maybe when you are in a partnership that's more committed, something like a long-term relationship, a common law partnership, or a marriage, you might find yourself falling into the shadow of becoming hypercritical of maybe your partner, or even maybe the finances that you guys have together. Maybe you're constantly seeking for more. Maybe something like you guys have investments together, okay? Maybe you guys have real estate together and you constantly want more, because it's like, that's the thing with Virgo. It's like you might feel like it's not enough. So this is what tends to happen when you have Virgo in the 8th house. Virgo in the 9th house. So the area that you might be super critical over could be anything to do with traveling. It could be entrepreneurship. It really deals with freedom, okay? So it's kind of like whatever dynamic you're in, you might feel like you're not free enough, okay? You might constantly be seeking that freedom. You might fall into self-sabotage energy where it's like, I don't know, for example, you got a job where you're working remote, okay? It gives you that freedom that you're seeking. And it's like you might sabotage that because it's like, it's not maybe giving you enough hours, right? Then you quit that job, something of this sort. It also deals with languages. It can deal with religion. It can deal with spirituality. It deals with the higher mind. So when you have Virgo in the 9th house, you might constantly feel like you need to improve yourself in terms of education, okay? So it could be like constantly going and seeking out to get different certifications, okay? Maybe you have, a bunch of degrees and it's like now you want to go get this certification and that certification. Obviously, everything is great as long as it is done in a healthy manner and you're not hyper-focused on becoming better, okay? That's the whole thing with Virgo. It's like when it's in the shadow trait, it strives for perfection, and it's like eventually the whole lesson with Virgo to learn is that perfection does not exist, okay, overall in life. So it's like, you'll notice when you have Virgo in any area of your natal chart, you're constantly like focused on that area because you want to become better at it, but it's like almost to your detriment, because it's like when you get that thing, you move on to the next thing. So like I mentioned, you might be constantly getting certifications because it's like you do that thing and it's maybe not quite like you had imagined, and then you go off to improve, maybe do something different. These types of things, okay? So in this area of life, okay, you can deal with, again, higher mind, education, learning, travel, different languages. So again, you might be learning different languages. It can deal with different cultures, it's foreign lands, and overall it's freedom, okay? So you might find yourself hypercritical and hyper-focused on this area, constantly trying to improve it when you have Virgo in the 9th house. Virgo in the 10th house. So the area that you're going to be hypercritical over, okay, is going to be your career. It's going to be your public image, okay? You're constantly going to find yourself climbing to the top. You're going to find yourself maybe in a position that you had strived for and it's still not good enough. You still want to go higher and you want to go higher and you want to go higher. That's what tends to happen when you have Virgo in the 10th house. Virgo does strive for perfection, okay? So for you guys, the area that you're striving perfection in is your career and it's your public image as well. So it's kind of like if something happens where your public image is not, to that perfect standard that you guys are seeking, it's going to really bother you. You guys are going to really try to fix it, okay? So it's kind of like there's a perfectionist energy happening there where it's kind of like you might feel like you have to look perfect all the time, right? And it's like maybe if one hair is like not in the particular place that it's meant to be, if you go to a conference or some sort of like public seminar, and it's like that's going to drive you crazy, okay? So in terms of your public image, maybe if you're doing videos like this and there's something in the background and it's like, it's like not meant to be there, or like maybe the picture is crooked, like whatever it is going to really bother you guys, okay? So that's the whole thing when you have Virgo in the 10th house. Virgo does teach us, okay, that perfection doesn't technically exist. So when we're aware of these things, we can maybe relax a little bit and maybe not become overly focused, because that's the thing with the Virgo energy, becomes overly focused on whatever area that it's in, and it's constantly feeling like whatever they receive is not good enough. They always want better and they want better, because ultimately what they're seeking is perfection, okay? That's the whole thing here. So that's what tends to happen when you have Virgo in the 10th house, okay? All things career, public image, your public status, and your social status as well. Virgo in the 11th house. So for those of you who have Virgo in the 11th house, the area that you're going to be super critical of is going to be the area where you are connecting large groups of people together, okay? It does deal with the mind. It also might deal with your own image and your identity, okay? Because Aquarius does want to be different. So it's kind of like as soon as maybe the rest of the crowd starts to do what it is that you guys are doing, you guys don't want to do that anymore, right? You guys want to be different, okay? So that's the area that you're going to be seeking the most amount of perfection in. If you guys are maybe into science or innovation, because the 11th house does tend to deal with that. You guys might constantly feel like you need to improve maybe an invention that you made, maybe an idea that you have, because that's really what Aquarius does deal with. It does deal with these ideas, okay? So Aquarius gets these downloads, it gets these ideas, And it's kind of like you guys might become hypercritical of the idea that you do receive, okay? Maybe never actually gets put out there when you have Virgo in the 11th house. Because really what Aquarius, which is the 11th house, is meant to do is they're meant to propel the collective forward with their ideas. And now what tends to happen is you guys might become too critical of your idea, okay? You guys might be like, okay, it's still not exactly where I want it to be, or whatever. Maybe you guys are working on a project, again, that's meant to propel the collective forward, and you guys are like, it's still not quite where I want it to be, and never gets put out there. And by the time you guys decide to put it out there, someone else puts it out there, okay? Because that's what tends to happen with ideas. They do float around until someone grasps them out of the astral and actually applies them. That's a huge thing to understand for those of you who do have Virgo in the 11th house, not to overthink the downloads that you guys receive and to basically just kind of put them out there, okay? And be okay with receiving criticism. That's the whole thing to understand, because it's like you might be sensitive in this area where it's like, you know, you really, really want your idea to take off, but you might receive criticism back, okay? Because Virgo sometimes is the criticism we receive. You guys might receive criticism back and you guys might not handle it that well, because again, it's like internally you guys are kind of like, well, the idea could have been better, okay? It could have been, you know, more tweaked. That's a huge thing to understand with Virgo in the 11th house. It does deal with large groups of people. It can also deal with the internet. It deals with ideas, connecting people, humanitarian things, even sometimes your own philosophies, right? Because again, it's the ideas that are propelling the collective forward. Virgo in the 12th house, this is an interesting placement to have because the 12th house does deal with the unconscious. So there's a lot of things to say here, okay? Unconsciously, when you do have Virgo in the 12th, you behave like a Virgo, okay? Unconsciously without realizing. What's amazing about astrology is we can figure out what our unconscious is and how we might be acting without realizing that we're acting. And then you can be in the driver's seat versus your unconscious being in the driver's seat. Because when your unconscious is in the driver's seat, you don't realize you're behaving this way. So it's kind of like when you have Virgo in the 12th, unconsciously, you behave like a Virgo overall, right? You might be super critical in a lot of different areas in your life, okay? And it could be in the driver's seat and you might not even realize that this is basically what's taking place because it's your unconscious, okay? The next thing is the 12th house does deal with spirituality. It does deal with spiritual beliefs. It also deals with romance, okay? It deals with romanticizing things. It can deal with art, film. It's the illusions in life, right? So it's like this might be the area that you're super, super critical in. It can manifest so many different ways, okay? You could become hyper obsessed with healing, okay? If you have Virgo in the 12th house, you could become hyper obsessed with escaping, right? There's the energy of that as well, right? Where it's like you become overly critical maybe of the physical world and now you're just like escaping constantly. There's an energy of that. Or you can become very, very cynical, okay? Because it's like the 12th house does deal with the crown chakra, right? So it's like you guys might become cynical and you might not believe in the ethers, the astral plane, the psychic world, the psychic realms, right? The unconscious, like these types of things. So if you don't believe in them, you become hypercritical about them, okay? You can become very cynical. So it's kind of like on a range, right? It really depends kind of like what energy you dabble into. But this is what tends to happen if you do have Virgo in the 12th house, okay? It can also be like if you're working on a project, for example, a lot of the time, 12th house energy can manifest into creativity, okay? It can manifest into, again, like I mentioned, film, maybe makeup, because it does deal with the illusions, right? It can be music as well. So it's kind of like maybe you have some sort of project that you've been working on, but you don't want to put it out there because you're very critical of it. You're striving for perfection. But the overall thing to understand with Virgo as a sign is that perfection does not exist. That's really what Virgo's teaching us at the end of the day. It's kind of like Virgo gets something and like they really wanted that thing, but like it's still not quite like they had envisioned. So they constantly like try to up level, okay? That's the whole thing with Virgo. And it's kind of like they always want something more because something's not enough, okay? But that's the whole thing Virgo is teaching us. So I'm going to wrap up this quick little video here on the area in life where you might be most critical in. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please do like, share, and subscribe. And I hope you all have a beautiful rest of the day.